Well, thanks for letting me get my glasses. Well, I'm actually surprised that the other two candidates didn't, elected not to show up, and I don't know what the reason is. Larry had confirmed to me that he was going to be here, but I think that Al had confirmed with you. So,
Kind of.
anyway. Guys, my name is Shannon Poe, and I'm running for supervisor. One is because I had several of the locals here ask me to run. They did that before and then again this time. But instead of me talking for 5 minutes really initially about what I'm, the reason and what I have to offer and all that kind of stuff, I'll address that in a little bit. I wanted to address a couple of things. I shot a little video this morning, really as a call for civility. And I think for all of us that are on social media, it's gotten pretty tense on there, and it's gotten to the point where I've got several personal messages from people that are actually afraid to even click like on a post, and it's unfortunate that it gets to that point. And I'm not blaming one side or the other, or one candidate or the other, because I've had supporters of my own say things and engage in this pretty argumentative banter, and it just doesn't have a place. You know, you should be able to express your opinion. You should be able to, you know, to talk about things and issues and things like that. And there is a line that it crosses when it gets to the point where it's just demeaning or it's attacking. And I think that's really what everybody has been talking about. So what do you do in a situation like that? Well, I don't know. If it's just a repetitive thing where it's just a constant attempt at a character assassination, and I don't, you know, it's not just directed at me, but, you know, I've seen them do it with Al, and I've seen them do it to Larry as well, and it's just not right. What we should be talking about is District 2 and what we can do for District 2. This county, guys, is it's a little bit concerning, and I've been to several of the Board of Supervisors meetings, and I've listened to quite a few of their meetings when I couldn't attend, which, by the way, we should, as a county, be able to step into the 21st century here and have a modern way that you can actually watch, see, hear the meetings, as opposed to this nightmare BS recording that they do that is really not very user-friendly. They could do a Zoom thing. They could create a YouTube page all for free, and they could film every single meeting and post it that people could watch the next day, and then give them a way that they can actually communicate and have their voice heard. And so that's one of the things that I would like to recommend. But what I want to address here, folks, initially here, and that is all of the stuff that I've been seeing about the EPA case in Idaho, and I didn't get to address that down in Coulterville. I wrote a response and provided it to the Mariposa Gazette, which I guess got published today. So the EPA case, folks, in Idaho I was reached out to by a number of miners back in 2014. And it was when the EPA was starting to take over all of the waters in the United States, meaning every rain gutter, every ditch, mud puddle, river, creek, lake, everything else. And miners have fundamentally granted rights in the passage of the original mining grants in the 1800s. You have water rights and you have real property rights. And the EPA, in my opinion, was trying to take all that away. They were declaring that you needed to have a pollution discharge permit that you buy from the EPA, and then as a part of that, you're basically signing over all of your property rights and your water rights to the EPA. So then they can say yes or no, you can do this again. And fundamentally and constitutionally, I don't think that they have the authority, and I think that that's evidenced as well by some of the recent Supreme Court cases that we've seen. There's one that just got argued on Monday that hasn't been decided yet, called the Sackler case. But the EPA over the years has been acting like Congress, and as you folks probably know, we live in a constitutional republic where we have people that represent us and they pass laws. Congress makes laws, not an unelected bureaucrat in a government agency. And so they were demanding that I pay $35 for a permit for polluting. Somehow paying $35 to them and relinquishing my rights doesn't, then I don't pollute. How does that actually work? So there was another Supreme Court case, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, God rest her soul, she's passed away, she was a Supreme Court justice. She coined a phrase that I want to use her language, and I'll paraphrase her, and it's called the soup pot theory, and it has to do with water transfer, which is exactly what a dredge does. A dredge does not add any pollutants to the water. Some of you in here dredge, I know these two guys have. So what it is if you, and what Mrs. Ginsburg said, is if you had a pot of soup here, and you dipped a ladle into that soup, you lifted it up, and you poured that soup back into there, are you adding anything? And the answer is no. And that's precisely what a suction dredge does. It just lifts gravel up, runs it through a little hose and across a sluice box and puts it back into the river. But cleaner when it was lifted up off the river bottom. Because it removes mercury and lead and old fishing weights and hooks and old knives, and we found all kinds of stuff over the years. So it does not add any pollutants. But what the EPA was demanding that we do is admit that we pollute and then pay them for the privilege of being able to dredge a real property mining claim, which we believe is just patently unconstitutional. So I said, no, I'm not going to obtain the permit. In the 3 years that I dredged there, ironically, the EPA never ever came and cited me. What happened was, it's under the provision of the federal laws, is that you can file what's called a citizen suit, meaning that if this gentleman here wants to file a lawsuit against me for violating the Clean Water Act, if he feels that the EPA didn't do their job, he can. And it's something that even that, I don't know if it's constitutional. I'm not an attorney, but our attorneys believe that that's even unconstitutional. So that's the thing, is we're very, very strongly looking at appealing this. And the EPA needs to stop making laws because they're not Congress. We all want clean water and clean air and things like that, and the simple activity of suction dredging doesn't pollute, and so I want to make that abundantly clear. But anyway, so I just wanted to bring that out in the open. If you guys want to see a formal thing that I've written as far as a response to this lawsuit, it's up on my Supervisor page. We're going to continue to fight this, guys, because we strongly feel that the EPA is out of control. They just got slapped back by the Supreme Court on a case called the West Virginia case, and it has to do with the Clean Air Act, which is that very thing, is that the Supreme Court found that they were acting as Congress and they were making laws which they don't have the constitutional right to do. And so that's what this case is all about. So with that being said, is welcome. That's
Hi,
okay.
folks, come on in.
So with that being said, is basically I'm concerned in Mariposa that our county is turning into like Alameda County or a Bay Area county, and that is they're spending an inordinate amount of money on salaries and programs and projects. And to give credit where credit is due, and I'll give this although Colleen and Al aren't here, is that Colleen brought up something in this last week's Board of Supervisors meeting, is that the county has all of these people hired to do different tasks and jobs within the county. And they hired an outside consultant, and they're going to pay him $50,000 to go do an analysis or some type of a paperwork project when we already have people that work in the county that are getting paid that could do that. So why is that? That's the kind of thing that I think that is a contributing factor to why our roads don't get fixed, and to why we don't have the fire abatement that we have or we need, and all those kind of things. Is that we always hear, guys, and you know this as well as I do, we've all been around for a long time, is that, you know, they keep telling us that we don't have enough money in District 2 to pay for the things that we need. Well, why is that? So one of the things, and the primary thing I would really like to do on day one, is a complete, what I would call more of a forensic audit, and that is every penny that goes in is, I want to see all of the projects that have been authorized over the last couple of years, and then validate that they've been done to the agreement, and where the money went, if it was spent correctly, and all those kind of things, just some basic accounting kind of stuff. And anyway, so I don't buy the concept that we don't have enough money. I just don't. So with that being said.
Questions? Go ahead, ask. Or go home. Oh, go ahead.
Have you read the last two audit reports from the county?
I have not.
Okay. Have you read the last budget?
I have read the last budget, yes.
Did you get through the 400 pages?
I got through about as much of it as I could without falling asleep. But, so can I ask you a question? It's Mike, right?
Sure.
So these audit reports, Mike, how are those done?
Well, there's one's done by an independent audit, the other's done by the auditor of the county. And
Independent meaning an outside
they have
contractor?
an outside auditor
Okay.
that does it. I'm, off the top of my head, I was reading that yesterday, and I can't really tell you the name of the person, but that's how it's done. There's two audits. One, I guess it's the way the protocol is, so that one watches out for the other. Okay. So in those audit reports, they line out, pretty much tell you where the money goes. Now, in what you're saying, to supplement that, they're not always broken down.
Not itemized?
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of little things like
Right,
that.
and that's what I saw.
Right. Okay, you can go back now, if you go to the budget, they're broken down a little bit more. The way to get to the information that you're looking at, and I'm granted, you're absolutely right, it's not easy to get there,
No.
but you have to go to those departments. When you go to the departments, then you get a breakdown from there as how things go. You mentioned roads and money for roads. There's a process for reconstructing the roads and where the money is appropriated. And there's a tier level that says, okay, this road needs, it's highly traveled, it's, you know, it's a, I can't remember, it's called a connecting roadway. Okay, some of the back roads, the dirt roads and stuff, they're not as heavily traveled. They don't supply transportation to a greater amount of the population and so on and so forth. So they are considered based on that information. Now, obviously, if you live on a dirt road and it's never fixed, you're not going to be very happy. But if you've got a transit area that a lot more people are using, and it benefits the county as a whole and those people traveling, you would probably want to fix that road first. Now, this is just how I understand it. I'm not saying this is
Right.
polished or anything else, but I do know that there is a tier situation where they make a decision as to what road they'll fix. Now, as far as the money goes for that, I imagine that goes through the utilities department, and they make a decision based on the departments that handle the road maintenance. I don't know if that answered your question.
It does. So I had two people that are second and third generation families up here in Greeley Hill reach out to me, and I had one-on-one private meetings with them specifically about roads and other projects on roads and money. And I was provided some, what I would call evidence. Being as I'm a former investigator, that's kind of the words that we use as evidence, that there was some potential improprieties there where the money wasn't going, the money was going out, but it wasn't being applied to the project that was being contracted. And the county has a tendency, I think, in a lot of cases, just like what we just discussed with what Colleen brought up, is to subcontract that out. And that's concerning to me, because let's just take for sake of an argument that we had $1 million that we put forth to fix the roads here, and they subcontracted some of it, and we had our own road crews do some of it. the way that that appears on a statement, at least from what I've seen from Mariposa, is kind of a line item entry. It doesn't show you who is the company. You could deep dive and get to that information, but it says, you know, here's the company and here's what they did. What I am being told is that there are many of these projects out there that all you have to do is drive out there and look at what was contracted to be done and it never got done. That's a pretty easy thing to prove. I mean, pretty basic. And so if that's the case, then I think questions need to be asked why that's the case and why are they spending money on things that aren't being done. I mean, we all pay taxes to get these things done, and that to me is a very, very serious allegation because that insinuates a criminal offense, in my opinion. And so that's something that I think needs to be looked into. The other thing is I published almost the same week that I announced that I was running for supervisor, I published all of the salaries of the employees that work in Mariposa County, and it's a public website. Anybody can get on there and find it and publish it and do whatever they want with it. And some of the salaries in there were a little alarming as well, is that, you know, 6 figures for some clerical tasks. And I mean, I haven't looked at the wage structure of Mariposa and compared it to like San Francisco or Sacramento or Fresno or whatever else, but it seems to me like it's pretty doggone high if we're paying, you know, a clerical person or a librarian $100 and some thousand a year. Is that the going wage? I don't know, but it's something I think that we need to probably take a peek at. Mike?
Some of those items, you know, when we were looking into wages and salary.
It does include benefits.
Well, that
Yes.
plus retirement and so on and so forth. But a lot of the issues come up with competing counties, okay? Now, obviously, we have a population of, what, roughly 17,000 right now? So, you know, we're not as big as Merced County or some of these other counties going out. In order to draw people here to do the jobs, then sometimes we have to be a little bit more competitive with salary, but we still have to work within our tax base and the money that we have.
I agree.
Now, what seems high here, if you travel 20 miles out to another county, you'll see that, wow, we're not paying people what that person's getting. An operating engineer for a sanitation department or sewer work, okay? His wages here are probably 2/3 less than what he could get in another county, okay? Now, how do we keep that person here so that we can do that maintenance? We have to draw those people here, so sometimes we may push that salary a little, which seems high for this county and what we're paying for, but when you look at other counties, it's an opportunity to get that person here to do the job. Now, I agree with you, some of the clerical things and so on and so forth, a good issue is the library. Why are we paying the CAO an extra $20,000 or whatever to be a librarian? That's questionable. And I will tell you right now that the grand jury will probably get a little note on that. So those things, they're there. I think that you just have to take the time to say, okay, why is that happening? And then be reasonable enough to understand what it is.
It is a little bit daunting, I think, for a regular citizen resident. So let's just take Roy, because I've known him for 15 years, I'm going to pick on him. Let's just say Roy wanted to ask those kind of questions. It's going to be very difficult for him to obtain that information from the county, and it's going to take months. Where as a supervisor, you can make a phone call or do a request through the supervisor aide, or I don't know what the proper title of her name is, but to obtain those documents to try to expedite that. Because I did ask some questions, and this has been probably a couple of years ago, about trying to obtain some of these things when I started hearing about them, and it was pretty difficult for me to get that information. So, is it out there? It is. Is it available and accessible for anybody and everybody? Probably not quite to that extent. So,
well, as a supervisor, that may be an issue you should address as far as how the county dispenses its information. I agree with you 100%. You go to the county website, you're on a trip. You might as well get your gear on and start walking down the path, because it's not an easy process. And I think what it is...
Try running for supervisor.
Well, I guess the fact of the matter is this, is that I've been on that site and I've looked up information, and you've got these people posted in positions that no longer work for the county. So I think, and what you're saying is correct, but I think where you start can help the whole process. So maybe you need to look at the way the county dispenses information.
Well, you know, I have a little experience with websites. I'm not a website designer or anything like that. I've created websites and tried to make them user-friendly. But it seems to me that the vast majority of these websites are created by technical nerds, if you will, and without really understanding what the end user really wants. And that is, you take somebody like my best friend Don over here, that he's pretty good on the computer, but he's not great, and he wants to be able to see, oh, okay, jobs, click here, and this, click here, and this, click here, as opposed to this loop of things and, you know, all that kind of rigmarole that makes it not as user-friendly. Which kind of brings me to another point here, and that is, in the time that I've been up here on the mountain, the communication level that I've seen from the previous supervisors has been severely lacking, in my opinion. And I met with Lyle Turpin back in Golly. It was probably 2008, I'm going to guess is the last time, 2008, 2009. And I don't remember how he communicated. I mean, I had to ask around to find out who our supervisor was so I could even find out what his name was. And obviously the internet has changed a lot, there's a lot more information available, but with Merlin, when Merlin was the supervisor, every time that I called and I had an issue, I always got his wife, every single time. And it was very rare. I had one meeting with Merlin, and it was at the restaurant when Shirley owned it. And Mr. Sweeney, I think, did a gallant attempt at trying to create a web page and to disseminate information, although that web page wasn't fantastic. So let me just ask you guys here in the room, what do you think is going to help that? I mean, is it a social media page? Is it a combination? Is it a web page that you can go to? Is it sending out a monthly mailer to all of the residents in District 2? Those are the kind of questions that I guess I'd like to ask, because you know, I've been on the internet since the 90s, and I kind of have an assumption, although a bad one, that everybody's on the internet, and that's just not the case up here. There's a lot of people that don't even have internet up here.
Dead spots.
So how do you communicate with those people and keep them informed and get them engaged in your government? Well, snail mail is probably the only way. I mean, realistically. I think that the vast majority, though, are on social media, and they also have access to the internet, probably via their cell phone or home internet. And would you guys agree with that?
I'd say answer, you have to use them all, and I think you need to utilize the local newspaper, that little, Yosemite Herald or something like that. You should probably do a monthly newsletter in there.
And that's actually how they've done it in the past, is in that newsletter. They've had a supervisor's corner, and
Oh, really?
the supervisors would tell.
I've only read that thing a couple of times.
Yeah.
Yeah, but people like my parents, for instance, in their age group, that's where they're gonna get their information. I mean, I personally don't read it that often either, but.
That brings us to another valid point too. So if that's the case, the county is pretty much relying only on their website to communicate with you.
Well, I never go to websites anymore. I use social media for any information I get on a website.
Because it's on the internet, it's true too.
Yeah, exactly.
So I wish that they would have a Zoom meeting for the supervisors.
Well, I think that they can create that. I'll get to you in a second, Malcolm. I think that they can create that, and it's a simple YouTube page, really. YouTube's free. You can just film it and upload it to the YouTube page, and anybody can see the meeting. They can see all 5 supervisors sitting up there, what their responses are. You can have a camera from the back that films the person that's actually asking questions at the podium, or you can have a double live shot. Good golly, I've done hundreds of YouTube videos, and they're really simple, and the large ones, like the one that was in Colderville, that was a nightmare to upload. It was 65 gigabytes, which takes a very long time. But anyway, the county has that ability to do that. And so the one thing that I think that I will do is after every meeting in Mariposa is I would like to take, just like what I shot after this one on Tuesday, is he was in the sheriff's office, Warren went with me, is take the camera and just do a live video and say, hey, look, here's an update of what happened today at the supervisor's meeting. These are the concerns, these are the things, and then let you guys to decide if you want to engage or write a letter or make a phone call or whatever it is. But then that way, the same day as the meeting, you're actually getting a live update of specifically what it is that transpired in there. But again, that's something, hi Scott, that's something that requires an internet connection.
Well, what I was referring to was that I feel like they should have a Zoom meeting in person so that people can ask questions from the Zoom meeting, because when the code compliance meetings were going on, I wrote a letter, but then they had a second meeting and I couldn't attend. So I tried to get my voice heard, but it was really hard. I mean, they said email this, and then if you didn't do it in time, it was just, I just feel like in person is better, you know?
Well, and I agree with you there. I know that they have I didn't forget about you, Malcolm, is they have a system now, because that was what we saw when we were in the meeting on Tuesday, is that we were there to testify in person, but on the housing issue and then also on the fire insurance, which I hope we get a chance to talk about here too. I'll write that down. Is people that can listen in on a phone conversation via phone, and then you hit *69 or whatever it is, and that sends a prompt to the facilitator of the meeting that then airs you across the speakers, and so then you get to ask questions that way.
I've heard things about that not being very reliable though, and that it's hard to hear and understand what's being said through that program. Is that?
I don't know. We didn't experience that. It came across pretty clear.
But on the end of the user that's on the phone,
Couldn't tell you. Yeah.
I haven't tried to call in on it either, but that was things I had heard, is that it was difficult to understand what was being said. On the person who's sitting at home couldn't hear well and couldn't hear what was being said. Was that person hard of hearing and that could be the reason? Or was there something wrong with the technology that needs to be addressed?
I don't know. I haven't heard of anything, to be honest with you, about the quality of the...
Yeah, it's that later to look into.
But I
the
think
Zoom
that
formats do work really well. Pine Mountain Lake is using them right now for their board meetings, and people just have to email the email address that's provided, and they can get a link to join the board meeting when it happens, and there's ways when you're in the meeting to ask a question.
So the California Water Board comes to my mind, Stacy, on this, is that, and that has to do with suction dredging as well, is they would have Zoom meetings where I could sit in my house, a half a mile from here, and be on that Zoom call, and then you push a button and you're watching it live and everything else, plus it's recorded, so anybody else 2 days later can go back and look at the entire presentation and the entire aspect of people testifying. Is you push a button and then yes, you are a part of that process. I don't see any reason why the county can't do that here as well, unless there's something I don't know about an internet connection and they have an old dial-up line or something.
Well, they're probably gonna need like video cameras, and they need, there's gonna be an investment.
It's not gonna be that much.
Right.
I know that because I've already done the numbers. They could do a system like this for a few $1,000s. What I would anticipate they will do, just because I kind of have a feeling that this is what they would do, they would hire an outside contractor to come in and a consultant to go, okay, we'll pay you $20,000, can you tell us how much it's gonna cost us to get a couple of cameras here
Well, they don't
and
have
set up the
anybody
system?
qualified to set up a system, that's probably why they have to do that.
Well, I don't know that they don't.
Yeah, I
Has
don't know that
anybody
they do.
asked all of the employees in Mariposa if they have any experience doing that? And if so, and we got somebody, why don't we use them?
Yeah,
Why don't we keep that money
Makes
here in the
sense.
county and use it for our own people?
yeah.
I know the courthouse has an IT person that does calls and things, and they hold court online sometimes.
You know, that is a good point, Judy. I have watched court cases in the courthouse live.
Yes.
And so, anyway, I gotta get to Malcolm. I put him on hold for 15 minutes.
I
Did you
think
like the
that-
music?
Hey, yeah, it was great. Zoom with a set time frame for a Q&A afterwards, all recorded and uploaded would be a great thing. I would caution you about like having a Facebook page, unless you're gonna staff it 60 hours a week. That would become a total free-for-all.
That's true.
Well, and I think that we've all had enough of Facebook just in the last few months. It's been fatiguing, I guess is the word that I would like to use.
Somebody just turned the
Yes,
phone
somebody
on
agreed
or
with you.
that was probably it, that's fine.
So, I'm almost thinking that you could create a Facebook page, and it's all in how you present the information. And I think as a supervisor, it really needs to be very factual. So if you go to a meeting, let's say that you're a supervisor, you go to a meeting and here's the issue, and let's say that it's this fire insurance thing. Here's what was done, here's what the county did. They had a outside contractor come in and give a presentation, and you present those facts without opinion. And then you post that for everybody to read, and it has to be factual. And if you had video, obviously, to back that up, then I think that it would be even better. However, I'm almost thinking that you just disable the comments.
Yeah, that's
Because
exactly.
then you're not gonna get this fighting kind of stuff, but then also there's an avenue that the person reading that can contact the supervisor and say, here's my concerns, or here's what I'm requesting, or here's what I wanna have my voice heard. And I think that way, then you avoid all of this kind of fighting stuff that goes on in the, because that, guys, good golly, it's tearing our district apart.
It seems like people respond to the wrong comment, and then it just becomes a crazy free-for-all sometimes on Facebook, so it's.
Well, and we addressed that before you guys walked in, and that is that, I think that, and it's both sides, it's these guys elected not to show today for some reason, we don't know why, but I'm not blaming Al and I'm not blaming Larry, because I've had some of my own supporters doing the same thing. I don't control them. I don't control a Dave Henderson or, anybody else on the internet any more than I can control Lisa. It just doesn't work that way. I learned that real quick. So, I think that as a supervisor, you've got to provide a very clear, clean, accessible, easy access to the supervisor for who you represent. And that is phone, it's email, it's messages, whatever. So you give them every opportunity to voice their opinion. And to try to keep somewhat of unity and without the division and the tribalism and things of that nature, that's kind of what I'm thinking is you just don't put comments. You put the information up there, like it's kind of like what Tom Sweeney did with his webpage. You didn't have a comment section on his webpage where everybody starts fighting one another. So they get the information, unopinionated, factual information about what is going on in the county, and that's how you communicate to them. So, thoughts?
Sounds good.
Sounds better.
Yeah. Can you address your private property rights as it relates to rentals and overnight rentals?
So, and short-term rentals?
Mhm.
Okay, so they had a meeting,
Yeah.
this was the meeting just this last Tuesday, and so this will be a a lengthy conversation, let me put it to you that way. So the one thing that I was surprised to hear was just how much of a shortage of housing that we have in Mariposa County. And it was shocking, actually, to be honest with you, and the amount of rent that people pay for housing. I honestly don't know, if you were an employee, let's say you worked at Burger King in, do they have a Burger King in Mariposa?
Yeah.
Okay. If you worked at Burger King in Mariposa and you're a 19-year-old girl wanting to save money to go to college, how is that ever going to be possible? I don't know how you'd pay your rent. I mean, there's not enough housing, and so it's kind of a, and I'll give you my opinion on it, and then we can kind of roundtable that, but I think that the state of California has done some things I strongly disagree with, tax-wise, policy-wise, and things like that over the last several years, which contribute to, you know, high gas prices and property values skyrocketing to, you know, federally, you've got a recession that is driving up building costs and everything. Everything is just super expensive. Heck, I just redid my little house over here, and I paid $6 for a 2x4. That's astounding. You know, we paid, what, $9, Malcolm, what, a year and a half ago? Now it's down to $6, and we're going, yay. So, but that is driving a lot of the people that own properties up here into turning those into short-term rentals. Malcolm's a renter. I mean, he's a landlord. I had a property that I rented, and it was the most stressful thing I think I've ever done in my entire life. Over the course of the 10 years that I owned the property, I had 5 different renters. 4 of them were horrendous, and I did complete background checks on all of them. One of them was great. He ended up buying the house, and I managed to walk away from it. But that's the problem as well, is that when you're a landlord, you know, you have to pay bills, and the state has done so many things that are in favor of the tenant, a bad tenant, and I can speak for Malcolm, he probably won't want me to, but he's got a bad tenant in there. As a matter of fact, her dog bit me, and he's been trying to evict her for a very, very long time, rightfully so. They haven't paid Malcolm and Heidi for probably well over a year, maybe even longer. And how do you get rid of somebody like that? So where's the motivation to get a long-term rental for somebody to actually move into? Would you want to take that on? I tell you this, as long as I live in my life again, I'll never have another rental just because it's a nightmare. I had somebody take a machete to the sheetrock inside the house. Kid you not, a machete. Actually, it wasn't a machete, it was a samurai sword. So, and they took spaghetti and threw it on the ceiling and the walls and everything like that. If you don't know how to get rid of tomato stains on white sheetrock, it's pretty hard to do. So, I think that all of these things are compounding the issue. So a lot of people are switching over to what they call the STRs, the short-term rentals, where it's like a bed and breakfast or Airbnb, that's what they're called. To where, you know, you charge $250 a night, they stay for 2 nights, and they don't bring in their 17 cats that pee all over in your air ducts, and, you know, they leave. And they make a good amount of money. The county makes a revenue on what's called a tot tax, and I think it's $10. Is it $10?
It's 12%.
12%.
13.5%.
How much?
13.5%.
13.5% that they make on each one of those rentals. So it's a moneymaker for the county as well. But the problem being is then you don't have the long-term rentals for the residents, the people that actually work here. And so, welcome.
Thank you.
So what you have is a person comes, stays 6, 12, 18 months, gets behind the rent, thrashes the place, and then couple that with our Biden announcing people don't have to pay, our
Because of
illustrious
COVID.
governor doing the same thing, And now it's coming down to the county level, and I'll never have another rental again. I'm selling the units.
So that's the thing that I feel bad for people like you, Malcolm, is that you don't have any recourse and that you have to hire an attorney because it's a very complex legal issue that, you know.
I did my own evictions myself for 17 years, and when they sat around during COVID, coupled with not having people pay, they redid all the procedures, and you're right, you can't do it without at least an eviction agency or an attorney.
So that's another, and I just want to make mention of this, is that is a reason why I think that we see a lot of declarations of emergencies, because when you declare, if you're a politician, and it can be federal or state, if you declare a governor or a president or whoever declares an emergency, then it really bypasses Congress, and then that whole process, that they can do things with a stroke of a pen. And boy, we have a lot of emergencies lately, haven't we? So whether it be the climate crisis or COVID or, you know, whatever. So
Couple it with meth heads, you got a real problem.
yeah, well, we have our problems with drugs up here as well. I don't think that there's a single person in this room that hasn't been impacted by somebody that is abusing drugs up here. I know I have. I know the Heights have. I know a lot of us have. Heck, I've had a meth, we call them tweakers, high-grade and dominized mine and breaking into stuff and stealing other kinds of things. And it's unfortunate that you have things that are driven by drugs like that, but now we got a fentanyl crisis, but let's not go down that road, so.
Another big issue, I don't know if it was an article and or a meeting in Tuolumne County this week, and I guess they lost out on, I think it was $600,000 of transient occupancy tax because of Yosemite National Park doing the peak hour pass. And I would submit that affects, very adversely affects every business surrounding Yosemite National Park because people can't get in, so they're not going to come. They're going to go somewhere else and drop their money somewhere else.
So a couple other things, and I'm not disregarding what you said. I'm taking all of that in. A couple other things that I guess I would like to bring up, and this is a good forum. I like that I don't have to, it's not scripted, we can really talk here today.
And I was gonna say, maybe that's a way the supervisor for District 2 can have a place and every so often meet with the people.
Can you set me up a room in the building here permanently? I wanted to thank Pastor Johnson for putting this whole thing together and for graciously donating the access to his building, and also to all of your following for allowing that. So very, very kind of him to do that.
And his time personally.
And his time. And he even wore a tie today, and I did not. I got a funny thing to tell you guys. I wore a suit and tie for 20 years, and I don't know how you feel about ties. I find them incredibly restricting, and I just don't like to wear them anymore. So I haven't worn one in a long time. But I wanted to talk about a couple of things here that I think are really important, and one is the water in Coulterville. And it's something that I've taken a pretty good look at. I mean, obviously I think that there's a lot more investigation to do, but that is a real fiasco, and I feel for the people of Coulterville. They've got really terrible water, and there's an awful lot of people saying that the county isn't maintaining the system, that they're pumping water out of the well in Coulterville, which is meaning the people's water, and that their water pressure goes down when they're pumping water to fill tanker trucks to go and splash water on the gravel roads to knock the dust down. And we would be far better served, I think, having those pump trucks pump out of Lake McClure or someplace like that. I know it's owned by the Merced Irrigation District, but then taking Coulterville's water. And the other thing is about the maintenance issues. There's been some allegations, and I've been provided some information on this, that somebody needs to take a pretty deep dive into that. So one of the things, and I know Al is probably very well versed on that, but one of the things that I have found is that there is grant money available to redo, probably in full, to redo or fix the water problems in Coulterville. And why that hasn't been done yet, or isn't a priority of the Board of Supervisors in Mariposa, is beyond me. I mean, that's a necessity. It's an absolute necessity that needs to be done, Mike.
That's in process right now. I believe they just got a grant for $2 million that goes directly to Coulterville.
So, my question would be, are they gonna use local contractors? What are they, it's probably gonna hire some company that...
Well, it's a process. Once again, RFIs go out, they do a bid process, and generally that's how the county works when they do that.
Okay.
The money that comes in from that grant, sometimes there's attachments to it. As I understand, it's a low, I don't know how that payback is on it, but I think that money just goes there. The other thing too is that $1 million that they just secured through Public Works, and they're working on the Don Pedro's sewer system down there. They've distributed that money, and Larry Harris put out some paperwork that explains how that money was dispersed through the service areas that money was designated for. I think Don Pedro ended up with $300,000. Coulterville, I think, gets $80,000 out of that amount.
It doesn't seem like very much money, does it?
Out of $1 million, when you start divvying it up to everybody, yeah, it cuts down. The good thing about Coulterville is that money's pretty much earmarked for them personally. It's not gonna go anywhere else. The other thing too is when these grants and everything become available, it depends on your situation as a community. If you're a need-based community, I can't remember what that's called. Anyway, if you're designated as that, money comes in a little bit easier. It means your population doesn't have the money, it's not very big.
Fixed income kind of
right,
things, and
that kind of stuff.
elderly, whatever.
Right, and you've got constituency that's a certain age, that, on fixed income, so on and so forth. The grant system can look into that, and if you're eligible for those things, then your entitlements come through on that. Another question, or another thing that you brought up too, Coulterville has a water advisory board. I believe it's only got 2 members right now because people have fallen off and back. And they're directly tied into the Board of Supervisors. An advisory board has to go through a process.
Right.
They have to be certified, they have all that stuff, and then they're a direct liaison with the county. Water issues that come up in your community, if you have an advisory board, you should be taking those issues there, and those issues should be able to be taken to the board. As a sitting supervisor, you're aware in your district what those advisory boards are. I believe they have a board for planning within District 2, planning board, okay? Those particular things are accessed by the public. I think you should know who's on your boards, what your boards are designated for. And if you have those questions you just presented, water questions, land, planning, I guess, has to do with that. You go to those boards and you can say, hey, what's going on here? What's the information going on? Or if you have a concern, you say, hey, take this, I want you to take this to the board and I want to get an answer back, so on and so forth. That's just my thoughts. But they are there and they are a source of information, and it's one way to keep your community tied into the Board of Supervisors and get that work.
And I think that's a good point. I think another thing too is, that's why I think it's going to be crucial to have meetings with those constituents, like in Coulterville, where you go down there and, maybe you rent the what is that hall?
Oddfellows.
The Oddfellows. I was going to say Goodfellows.
I live right in town.
The Oddfellows Hall, and you just have a meeting and you get the people engaged and you get their input, because realistically, folks, the supervisor's position is to represent you and to represent your will. and it's not an agenda that I would have or really any of the candidates would have, is that's how I see the position, is that you're taking your agenda to Mariposa and fighting for that. I guess is the best way I can put it. Getting back to your STRs before I think here, move on to another thing here, Malcolm, is the board voted to put the brakes on, that's their quote.
They're imposing a moratorium.
They're imposing a moratorium that's gonna happen in about 6 weeks on all of those short-term rental permits applications being processed. So they're stopping that, and they're going to postpone that until the new board takes over in January. And then they'll revisit that on whether or not they want to issue those. I came out and said that I thought that they should give preferential discretion to the residents of Mariposa County, meaning that if he owns a home here that he wants to turn into a rental or a short-term rental or whatever, he should be moved to the front of the line as opposed to somebody that lives in San Jose that owns property up here. Simple as that. And that kind of keeps the money local. Although I think that even with people that own properties that are from San Jose, I mean, they're probably spending money here, and we know we're getting their tax money. But a couple other things I want to go through here is, one is about that fire insurance. And I don't know if you guys are like me, but I lost my fire insurance on the property, and they won't insure me now. And even though I had a dozer and we dozed off the whole dang property there, and it looks like a national park and there's nothing that can burn, I still can't get fire insurance. But we don't have a structure, we don't have a living structure on the place. I know you guys have had the same problems with your fire insurance going up dramatically, right? So even on this little tiny home that I've got over here that's, you know, the size of a cracker box, my fire insurance has gone up over 100% just in the last couple of years. And so this was kind of ironic, is that, and a lot of that has to do with, in my opinion, what is coming out of Sacramento. But this is, only government can do this, is that Newsom now is bragging about how you can get a 20% reduction on your fire insurance if you spend thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars doing all these retrofits on your house and your property. Wow. Yay, we're gonna get 20% after it's been raised 120%. So, wow, what a savings. But I posted a number on my supervisor page that is an 800 number. The county asked this gentleman to come in. He was a really nice guy. He gave a presentation on what those parameters were that Newsom is requiring that you do in order for you to get a reduction. And anyway, he claims that they can insure just about anybody up here. And so I posted that 800 number. If you have problems getting insurance, the number is on the page. And I'm going to call them on Monday, and I'm going to find out if they'll offer insurance on our property and see what happens there. But gosh, guys, fire insurance. Scott?
Yeah, there was a really interesting program on Channel 3, it's been a couple of weeks ago, and so what it appears as though has happened is they're not only, like right now my sister is in the process of trying to get fire insurance, but now it's down to the point to where they're asking for handrails on ramps, they're asking for, and what this program was about is now the insurance companies are taking the stand of, they can come upon your property and they can totally evaluate the foundation that's under her modular home. Now, in other words, what they're looking for is total exposure, okay? So they will not issue her fire insurance because she hasn't addressed these other issues.
That's what was in this presentation, is they were
Okay.
talking about the foundations and things like that.
Yeah.
as well as a multitude of other things with fireproof siding and, you know, special roofs and all this kind of stuff. You know, maybe the government thinks, well, the government does think money grows on trees and they have all the trees. We don't have that luxury of having an inordinate amount of money in our bank accounts that we can go in and do a $50,000 retrofit on a modular home. We just don't, to save 20%. So I don't know what to tell you about something like that, Scott. I think that this is the whole argument about over-regulation, is that the regulations become so vast and so intrusive and almost to the point of a prohibition of owning a home. And maybe that's by design, I don't know, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but gosh, it sure seems like they just don't want people living up in the rural communities here, you know. It really does seem like that, and I don't know how you overcome that when you have Sacramento doing these things, saying it's gonna be required or you're gonna get penalized, and what happens if you don't have the money or the resources?
Right. And so I can only assume, because of the number of homes that have burnt in California this year, that the FAIR plan will only be much higher next year.
I got a renewal from my California Fair Plan for $3,500, and my house is not huge. $3,500 a year, and then that doesn't include anything, if a tree falls, it doesn't.
No,
you have to get a
no
wrap on the
liability,
house, so you have to
nothing
get
on
a
the
wrap
inside of
on
the
it.
home. Yep.
We had a tree falling,
Yeah,
they wouldn't touch us.
no.
So,
California
so you
Fair
know,
Plan is
to me, kind of what's going on is now, you know, the state is, you know, saying, you know, look at what a wonderful job CAL FIRE is doing, and don't get me wrong, I think they have. I think they are definitely on the right track with the amount of aircraft that they have. But we all know it's not cheap to fly.
So let's talk about CAL FIRE. We happen to have a retired fireman with us, and firefighter, I should say. What do you want to be called? Warren. Warren. We have a retired Warren with us.
He's retired as an engineer.
So I was astounded to hear this, and it came from a resident. I'm not going to name him, but I can tell you every one of the people in this room know this guy. He's been around for a long time, very, very well known, and he was telling me, because he was a part of the volunteer fire department here in Greeley Hill for many, many years, is that, and what I'm going to say here, guys, is what he told me, and I trust him. I believe that the guy is inherently honest. I haven't validated these numbers, so I haven't actually pulled documents, but I'm just going to state what the numbers that he provided to me, is that when we had our volunteer fire department here, it was about $250,000 a year is what we were paying as District 2 for that, and they were volunteers. And then the county decided to, in his words, be more like Amador County and to contract with CAL FIRE. And so they started contracting with CAL FIRE at $1.4 million for the last, over each year for the last two years. And now CAL FIRE is asking for an additional $2 million this coming year. So we've gone from $250,000 to, what is that, 3.4? That kind of seems odd. So I asked him about, well, why don't we make a proposal and bring back the volunteer fire department? And I'll be honest, guys, my knowledge of fighting fires is running a dozer. That's it. I don't know anything else other than that. These are the experts in doing that stuff, but my understanding is that there's a significant amount of training that has to be done in order for you to go and put water on something that burns, and probably rightfully so. And what has changed is the amount of that training that has to be done has gone from here clear up to here, and the people don't want to spend 20 extra hours a month, volunteer mind you, to go in and do this training on a monthly basis, because it's become, again, really over-intrusive about the amount of training that needs to be completed. Is that pretty much a correct assessment, Warren?
I think there's ways around it.
Legal ways around it?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's plenty of departments up here that have done like countywide academies. That's what Tuolumne does, they put on a countywide academy. So they bring people from Twain Harte and Jamestown and wherever in the county, they put them through this academy, and then they can go back to their departments and volunteer, you know. But what a lot of these departments have done, BWAC and Twain Harte, they're basically, it's like a trainee position, so they get put through the academy, they go back to Twain Harte, and they start working shifts. So they're only allowed to work, it's basically part-time, I think it's 960 hours a year. So they get a bunch of these kids that want to build a resume, want to get a job as a firefighter. They come up there and they work, you know, 3 or 4 shifts a month or whatever. And sometimes, you know, they'll also have a job seasonally with CAL FIRE, so they'll work during the summer with CAL FIRE, come back to Twain Harte or wherever, work the rest of the year.
It seems very expensive to me to be paying millions of dollars for CAL FIRE. And I have nothing but admiration for the firefighters themselves. I've seen them, I've worked around them, I've been around them a lot. I think that I have never had a bad dealing with any CAL FIRE person, ever. And so I think what they do is heroic. However, I think that that's something we should probably take a look at here for at least the Greeley Hill area, is maybe taking a good look at that and crunching some numbers and see if it's another viable option again. Mike?
You gotta remember, I'm thinking that they got 4 new aircraft this year. I think they're Blackhawks. Water capacity was greater and so on and so forth. And they have to pay for those planes. And I don't know if you noticed this year, but the fact that they got to these fires quicker was based on that aircraft. The question I always have is why we don't have a staging area. Castle Air Force Base just sits there. Okay, you can put big water.
Where's that at?
In Nashville.
Oh, okay.
Okay, in fact, I think when Obama came to Yosemite, they flew in there. It could support that aircraft, but what always happens with CAL FIRE when you talk about financing, so they have an argument with the U.S. Forestry Service. They both have contracts, they both decide who's going to get what. Mm-hmm. And they're very protective of where that money goes when they do it. It seems like a lot of money, but when you look at what the equipment is and so on and so forth, you have to look at what's being purchased and whether or not that's helping the situation. The other thing is...
I think that, and let me just interrupt you for a second, I couldn't agree with you more. The equipment, technology, and everything that CAL FIRE has would far exceed anything that we have up here. I agree.
Well, the other thing I was going to get at, you were talking about volunteer units. We had a town hall, I want to say maybe a year ago when Tom was still seated. He came down and we talked about it. And the biggest problem that our station guys had was that they couldn't get people. I think I'm sorry, was it the guy in the front? Warren. When you were talking about these guys that get trained and they want to be firefighters, they don't want to be volunteers, and generally that's where they're going. They get out of that volunteer set and they move on into a regular job as a firefighter. Volunteers in these areas, we have the stations, we just don't have the manning.
Right.
And the money that goes out for that, I know we have, I was looking at the engines that are purchased for these volunteer stations. They have the equipment, they just don't have the manpower. So the question I would put out is, how do you get people to man these stations? Maybe you could address that for me.
That's kind of the thing I was getting at, is that the department I worked at down in Manteca area, the volunteers, they were a pretty big part of what we would do, you know, and they would, we had turnover like crazy, you know. Get them trained up, they would come in and work for 2 or 3 years and then find a job. That's just the nature of the beast. But I'm just saying that nobody here locally wants to do it.
Well, we're old.
So why not build a nice training ground, you know, build a reputation as a good training facility and good instructors, and, you know, we had people driving from the Bay Area that would come over and work just because they were trying to get that training. We had a good reputation for training people, and they were also building their resume, getting experience building a resume. So if nobody here wants to do it, why not bring people from Turlock and Modesto that want to come up, train at a world-class facility, and then come up here, sit at Greeley Hill, and build a resume, get a few bucks while they're going to school. A lot of guys were taking classes, say like at MJC, the Fire Training Center.
Well, let's not forget, the California Conservation, we have prisoners that are on the fire lines. We have that camp for them, and they get trained. And those guys they're good at what they do. And, you know.
They get like $1 a day, don't they?
Something like that. But there's a job path after that for a lot of those guys. And plus, I don't know if you've ever been to the camp, it's pretty impressive. It's not like being in prison.
I haven't, but I've seen those guys in action, and they're pretty tough dudes.
Well, it's, you know, if you gave me a choice of fighting a fire or being in a cell all day, I think I want to be a firefighter.
My understanding is that camp is going away.
Yeah, my
Columbia
mom works
College.
as a correctional officer there, and they've been talking about disbanding that.
So with the early release and everything that they're doing now, they call them golf crews. The golf crews used to have 16 guys on them, plus a captain to run the show. And they're down to like 12 guys on a crew now, because if basically the guys that get on those crews are what they call like a low risk.
You have to pass a pretty stringent
So your serial killer is not going to be out on the fire line. So these guys are, maybe some drug offenses, robbery, some burglaries, that sort of thing.
They're probably slated for release too.
Well, that's the thing that's happening is these guys are like, oh, this guy's low risk. We're just going to kick him out so we can get our prison numbers down. So that's why they're having a hard time filling these golf crews, and they're dropping the numbers down from 16 to 12.
What about Columbia College's firefighter training program? Does anyone know anything about that? I know it's
kind of. What about it?
Let's move on.
Okay.
That I think if we get to the point where we have an option to look at a volunteer fire department here, is that we're going to get a lot of input from the people and experts, meaning the actual firefighters and people that have ran divisions and things like that. So, but I got a whole lot of other things here. I wanted to address one thing, and then I want to talk about code compliance and obviously any questions that you guys have. So, one of the things that I've noticed, and it's coming from information that I've been provided by a multitude of people in the district here, is that I don't want to just point a finger and blame, but it seems to me like the permitting process for building or retrofitting or creating a rental or whatever it is, it seems like it has slowed down somewhat in the county. And I know, I can't even remember the last time I had to pull a permit, probably, 4 years ago, done with the Amara building. That went through pretty flawless. I mean, we built a 1,000-foot building, poured a concrete slab. Justin, the inspector, would come out, I guess to this area, he comes out on Tuesdays once a week or something. I don't really remember any problems. I don't remember any problems with excavation or things like that. But now, it seems like, and I don't know what's changed, or if it's just isolated, but it seems to me like there's been a real slowdown in the issuing or approving of permits for building. And if that's the case, that may be a contributing factor to why some of these rental homes and short-term whatever they are not being built, is because that process is being slowed down. So that's another thing that I think there needs to be some questions asked about. And I think that you can you can take a look at that pretty easily, is when they were applied and then how long it took. And if there's individual circumstances in there that delayed that, you can even see why. So, but I think, I'm hearing from a lot of people that that's an issue, and so I wanted to bring that up. The other thing is with this code compliance, and I think you guys all know, somebody posted a picture, I didn't even know Al took a picture of me while I was testifying on that a couple of years ago. I vehemently oppose this, and it's probably one of the times, the very few times, that I'm just going to come out and say, guys, this is a really bad thing. Because I want to tell you a story here. So I was hired by a very large city mayor to go in and do an investigation on some allegations from the residents in the city that they had inspectors that were stealing their homes. That was the allegation. And so we came in, and this is what happened. And it's almost this program in a nutshell. So you had a code compliance thing that was enacted in this city, and you could be an anonymous person that would submit a complaint on a property, and then that would send out a code compliance officer. And there was about 25 or 30 of them in this city. It's a big city. I mean, well over 1 million people. And anyway, so these code compliance officers kind of went about their business for a long period of time, and then they concocted a scheme, and there was about 12 of them. And what they did is they filed the anonymous complaints themselves. And they did the research, and it was exclusively African American homeowners in a very depressed area of the city that was, just didn't have a lot of money, fixed income type of living, but these people's homes were completely and totally paid off. They did the research because they had the access. So there's the means. You have means, motive, and opportunity. So they would go in, they would find these homes that were paid off, that they were living on a fixed income. They would file an anonymous complaint against the property for garbage. They would go out and inspect the property themselves and say, I'm sorry, Warren, your property looks terrible and you don't meet the city requirements. I'm going to write you the citation. So he would write the citation. He didn't have any, and they would specifically try to target people that were of disabilities, that didn't have the physical capabilities to go out and clean stuff up. And so that citation turned into a second citation. That turned into a lien. And eventually it turned into where the people could potentially lose their property. But before it got to the point where the city was going to take over the property, these inspectors would go in and go, look, buddy, you're in a heck of a bind here. Your home's probably worth $150,000. I'll give you $70,000 cash right now if you'll just walk away. And they did. And they did that a lot. There was, I can't really discuss all of the details of the case still, but it was very substantial number of homes, meaning more than 10. And we investigated and interrogated the people. We got confessions out of them, and of course there was prosecutions and things like that. And the city did the right thing, is they stepped up and they made it right for the people. Obviously, very right, because that's my concern with, and I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but that's the worst case scenario, is when you have code compliance where people can submit an anonymous complaint. And let's say I don't like that weird looking guy sitting in the back in the blue shirt there by the name of Kevin. If I don't like him, I can fill out a thing saying, I saw this guy do this and this and this on his property, he never pulled any permits, anonymous, and I send it in. I don't feel from a property rights standpoint that a county should be able to go in without a warrant and just investigate based on an anonymous complaint. They shouldn't. It just doesn't, I'm not an attorney, like I say, but you got to have probable cause in order to do those kind of things and to violate, somebody's constitutional rights. So what if the people, so let's say, and we all know that there's properties around here that look like dog poop, okay? There's one down in Colderville right along the highway there. It's probably the best standout. There's one on Smith Station. There's a few around here, as a matter of fact. I tend to be a little more, I guess, open-minded and heartfelt about these folks, because what if they just don't have the financial resources to deal with it, to fix it or correct it, or the physical capabilities to fix it? You know, should that turn into a lien where they lose their property? I don't think so. There's gotta be a better solution than doing something like this. And this, to be honest with you, this code compliance issue terrifies me in this county if they pass this. I can't urge you enough to oppose this. I think it's a horrendous idea, I really do. And for those reasons, A, because I dealt with it firsthand, and B, I just think it's unfair. So, any questions that you guys have? Gosh, I talked for an hour and 20 minutes. And you had it easy today.
Well, let me ask you one. I think we've talked about this a little bit before, but Board of Supervisors just passed this ordinance back in June where you have an outstanding violation, code violation on your property. This ordinance says that now if you have that, if something else, if you want to do something else that requires a permit, they won't issue that permit to you. But what can be done about codes or, you know, or ordinances that have been passed like that? I mean, can those be?
Well, you could try to pass a petition to go away, but once it's passed, it kind of sets it into law, if you will. And so, I mean, I guess I can understand both sides of the coin there. If you're a property owner and it's a really minor violation that, and I don't know what that would be, let's say that it's a footing or something, you know, on a fence, gate, whatever, that it doesn't really impact the structure, then maybe it should be on a case-by-case basis. I don't know what the details are on that, Warren, but I guess I can kind of see both sides to the coin there, is that the person wants to build, but they have something that is slowing them down, and they can't because of that, correct?
Yeah,
Or
well-
fix something else that.
Yeah, but with my situation, you know, with my, you know, unpermitted porch that I'm fighting on my second structure on my property. Several years back, I had an instance where my main electrical box had a short inside, and I thought maybe it was a meter or something. So PG&E said, "No, you're gonna have a fire in here if I don't pull this meter." So they pulled my power, and they said, "We can't reconnect it until you have a signed permit and it's all fixed." So.
Oh, wow.
So like, if I've got this violation that came up in May, and say, you know, after this thing passed, I have a situation where I have to have a permit to do electrical work or whatever.
They won't let you do that.
Yeah, so I mean, is the county gonna force me to live without electricity until I fix
Yeah,
this
see, I
porch?
think that's something that should probably be looked at if it's an essential service, you know, like water, power, sewer. One of those three things are kind of a requirement to live. Maybe there should be an exception that they look at that, and maybe even on a case-by-case basis. I don't know what the procedure is on that, Warren, but I would think on those three key elements that are crucial to living, you would think that they should be able to make an exception. If you're gonna be without power for a long time, that's gotta be.
Warren,
You know, I read.
Well, and that was done before you purchased, right?
Go ahead,
The
Mike.
porch,
Yes,
yes,
the porch was.
yes.
Warren, were you, if I try to understand this, did you build something and didn't get a permit?
No, we bought a place that had two houses on it.
Right.
And my dad died a couple years ago. Mom didn't want to live up here anymore. She wanted to go back to the ranch in Turlock. So I got this empty house sitting there, and I wanted to make this a short-term rental, right? So going through this arduous process of trying to get this permit, I thought I had cleared all the hurdles, but somebody at the county said, "Oh, you got more living space than what you're permitted for." And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they go, "Yeah, there's a porch on here that isn't on the original plans." I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And They said, yeah, this porch is built without a permit. Well, that's exactly how it is when we bought the place. So sometime between the time it was built and the time we bought it, this guy added his porch on there.
So what was the recourse for this?
Well, I had two options. I could either pay them for a permit so I could tear the porch off, or go through the whole process of getting an architect to draw it up, get a building permit, and then retrofit it with footings and some
So
hurricanes.
you couldn't have an inspector come in and say, well, okay, this porch is here, here's a couple of things you have to do to bring it to spec. You'd have to start the whole process again. Okay, and that was there was grandfathered in, if I understand you, built before you acquired the property?
No, it wasn't grandfathered in. It just, you know, it, I guess, slipped past the county, past the real estate agent. I had no idea that that porch was built, wasn't even built at the time the house was built. So,
They would say that it's caveat emptor, you know, buyer beware, and has to do with inspections and everything else, but I don't want to get stuck on one issue here.
I was just curious. That seemed to be a problem when this whole code enforcement was being reevaluated. There were a lot of people that had prior instances, and they were trying to figure out what to do with these people that didn't realize that they weren't up to code or didn't have permitting. That was my question.
the point that I'm making though is now that they passed this new ordinance in June, now that I have this, they call it a BWOP, built without a permit violation. If I had, say like I had an electrical issue like I had a few years ago, or is the county gonna make me sit at home without electricity for months on end until I get this other violation cleared up before I get a permit to fix my electricity?
There should be a petition process that you can go through, and I think in rare circumstances like that, you should have another recourse to be able to deal with that, because that obviously is not related to your porch, correct?
Right.
But it's essential to survival to have electricity during winter. So I think that should be something that, it should be a pretty easy thing, that is, it's one of those essential commodities that you need, is that should be evaluated, and, you know. But anyway, I want to get back to that same topic, but on an issue that I had. So 12 years ago, when we bought the property, I pulled an excavation permit because it was bare land. It just had a road, and that was it. And everything went great. We excavated. We brought two basically dry band boxes, and then I had an engineered roof that I put over the top of these two dry bands, and it was great. It made a little shop. We didn't have power there, no water, no sewer, no septic, no electricity, no nothing. It just basically was kind of for storage. And a couple of years ago, I had one of my neighbors file an anonymous complaint saying that I had people living on my property. And it was kind of funny too, is that Don, who goes to the property all the time, is my mining partner. We had bought one of those 10-foot, so from here to the wall, by 20-foot Harbor Freight, you know, little tarp covered canopy deals, the cheapy ones. It was like $200. And I had about 2.5 cords of oak underneath that. And the county sent me a letter saying that they were going to come and inspect my property. It wasn't a question of if I could allow them, they were just going to come and do that. And that I had people living on my property, I can't remember what the term that they used, unregistered or documented residents. And they showed me this aerial photograph, obviously from Google Earth, of this, and I laughed because there was 2.5 cords of oak underneath it, and the tarp was even ripped, for crying out loud. And so the lady comes up, Karina, and she, you know, I let her through, and I'm like, look, I got nothing to hide. I pulled permits. I got everything signed off on. Everything's been inspected. I have nothing to hide. You're going to find out that there's 2.5 cords of oak under your house that you say I got somebody living in. And maybe a mouse or a rat, I don't know, but certainly not a human. And so she comes up and she says, yeah, you know, obviously there was some kind of mistake. But what about this roof over here? Really? I go, well, that, if you go back to my file, is you'll see that the county guy came up when I pulled the excavation permit and all that. He signed off on it. It's already been inspected and everything's good. And she's like, well, I don't see that document in here. And I said, well, I don't know what to tell you, but I can even remember the guy, and I can remember him and the conversation that I had, because he wouldn't even get out of his vehicle. He kept pouring coffee out of a green Stanley thermos, and it was raining that day, and I was standing in the rain, and he was in his truck, and the guy never even got out. And he signed off on it, and you know what? And then he went about his business. She goes, well, do you have a copy of that? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't. It's 10 years ago. I don't have a copy. I just assumed that he would file it with the county. And she's like, well, he retired, and so we're gonna have you get a structural engineer out here and you know, hire this guy to say that this is an engineered roof. So $3,000 later, I had to hire an engineer, and sure enough, didn't have to really do anything to the roof, other than the fact that I had to have him put his stamp on it and send it to the county, and then I was in compliance. That's where these type of issues, guys, where the government, when they, and I mean the county government, comes in on these code compliance things without, I would say, just cause. And to me, the impression that I got, because I dealt with this woman, is she was looking for something, anything, to kind of justify this. And we lived through that. And, you know, what's going to happen if it's somebody that, you know, $3,000 is a lot of money. What happens if you don't have that money? What happens to you and your property? That's my fear. That's what my fear is with the residents up here. You know, this is a pretty, what's the polite term, income challenged county, and people don't have $3,000. It's probably more than that cost now. So, Mike?
You know, that's interesting you say that, and I can't get over how we live in a community where everybody helps everybody.
Yeah.
Okay? And so we have these people that, like you said, are on a fixed income or elderly. Everybody has a skill set.
Yep.
Okay, you have homes for what's it called again, habitat thing? Okay,
Habitat for
yeah,
Humanity.
okay. So why can't we, when these people are in violation or there's a problem, why can't we coordinate with a community and say, have a group of people that say, okay, we have 10 guys that have different skills. These people, this person got slammed. Let's go over there this afternoon, let's fix it for them, and, you know, everybody have a root beer after the thing's done.
You know, the first time I met you was down in Don Pedro, but prior to that was...
Yeah, that wasn't a very good meeting.
No, it's all right. Hey, it's water under the bridge. But I had that exact conversation right over here at the Greeley Hill, at the restaurant, is if you have a distressed property, to give you an example, I'm replacing her water heater tomorrow morning. So she doesn't have to go hire somebody to do it. She didn't have the money. And you know what? I can do that. I can do it in 35 minutes. What are you doing tomorrow, Don? I don't. I'm fine. I can do it. That is specifically what we talked about on the code compliance issues, is that there is a better solution, in my opinion. And that if you've got a property, and we'll give you two different scenarios on this, Mike, is that one is, let's say you have a really uncooperative person that may be the one down in the town below us, without naming people, that just will give you the middle finger and say, I don't care what you do, whatever. Then maybe you go through a step process of warnings and things like that. But in addition to that, I think that the supervisor should go down there and go, Warren, my name's Shannon, I'm your county supervisor. I just want to let you know, this is how things can potentially go bad. All the county wants, as well as all the residents, is for your property to be cleaned up. I can get 15 people over here to your property next week, and you know what, we'll volunteer our time, and we'll try to help you clean up this the best that we can. The attorneys in Mariposa probably have a heart attack over liability issues, you know, everybody's gonna have to sign waivers and whatever. But I think for the vast majority of people is you could get properties cleaned up relatively easy without getting into that compliance issue. You know, a good example is even down in Gentry Gulch there, we pulled 48 yards of trash out of that canyon down there for the BLM, even though they had, you know, funding and a bond to put up and all that. They were kind enough, they paid for our dump fees, but we went down there with 25 people and cleaned it all up for them. So it was actually a really, really good thing. But I think you're absolutely right on track with that, Mike. It's the same thing that that we literally have discussed a couple of times. There has to be other solutions, and because we're such a tight community, I think that could be done. I really do. Not in every instance, but I think in most instances. Maybe.
Sounds good.
If the attorneys in Mariposa didn't freak out, which they probably would. Everybody's always concerned about getting sued, so. All right, well, guys, I appreciate, you know, all of the information and feedback and questions, and I think we all kind of took away a lot today. So I want to again thank Pastor Johnson for the facility and for hosting this. And it's unfortunate we didn't have the other two candidates here. I'm sure they have a valid reason for not being here. And again, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Well, it's such a nice presentation that you had here, and everything's all laid out. Very, very nice.
Oh, thank you very much, I appreciate it. Very good.